15 accountants failed. But the poor delivery girl showed up and told the millionaire, "Don't sign this." And what they did surprised everyone. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Riley Martinez rushed into the elevator trying to balance the thermal bag with the CEO's special lunch in one hand. Destined for none other than Dexter Lancaster, the most feared man in the Empire Tower, and a freshly squeezed orange juice in the other. Everything had golden labels. Everything came with ridiculously specific instructions. No onions, no garlic, and rice cupped at the perfect point between moist and dry, as if anyone could cook rice with a ruler. Bossy millionaire. Of course, he had to be a Scorpio, Riley muttered, read 47B, but the delivery label said 47A. Okay, Riley, breathe. Just letters, and numbers. You've got this, girl. You used to deliver sushi on a bike in the middle of winter. You survived the vegan buffet Christmas madness. You can walk to a door without messing this up, she whispered to herself. But this was Riley. And with Riley, the unexpected was always around the corner. Instead of turning left toward the 47A reception, she went right. The hallway was quieter and darker, lined with massive potted plants that looked like they belonged in a Dubai hotel. Then she heard voices. "What?" she mumbled, almost tripping over her sneakers. The sound came from a room up ahead, its doors slightly ajar. Firm, controlled male voice. "Do the calculations completely wrong. Tell Dexter he'll make 10 times more from this merger with Meridian Corporation. Get him to sign the contract immediately." Riley's eyes widened. The voice belonged to a tall, elegant man she vaguely recognized. George Hartwell, Dexter's partner. The kind of man who smiled with his lips, but never with his eyes. In reality, he'll lose everything. 10 times more than he invests. One move and it's done. George finished while the other men in the room, 15 of them all in suits, looking like they slept hugging calculators, muttered tensely among themselves. Riley didn't know what to do. Instinctively, she slipped behind one of the giant plant pots near the door and froze, her heart pounding loud enough to be picked up by satellites. 10 times the loss, a scam, merger, wrong numbers. This is serious. Really serious, she whispered under her breath. George went on, "I don't care if any of you feel uncomfortable. You've been paid and the contract is ready." He paused for effect. "The signing happens in 10 minutes. No hesitation in the boardroom. If Dexter asks for a review, say you've already validated the scenarios. Projected profit is 10x. Repeat 10x like a mantra. He loves round numbers. Once he signs, he's finished." A heavy silence followed. The accountant simply nodded. Riley, on the other hand, felt like she had forgotten how to breathe. She knew Dexter was arrogant. Yes, the kind of CEO who probably had a golf club hidden behind his leather chair. But did he deserve this? She looked down at the thermal bag in her hands. The lunch was still warm. She had come to deliver food and somehow stumbled into a plan to destroy the CEO of the tallest company in the building. Who is she in all this? Just a small-time delivery girl with a backpack that smelled like yakisoba and a history of late rent payments. Should she do something, or would she just look like another crazy person getting kicked out by security? Of course, he won't believe me, she thought, biting her lower lip. A delivery girl saying she overheard a corporate sabotage plan while hiding behind a plant. Sounds like a bad comedy script. She peeked through the crack in the door again. The men were standing up. George straightened his jacket with a satisfied smile. The accountants exchanged guilty glances. Then, one by one, they left the room and headed toward the boardroom. Riley crouched lower behind the plant, clutching the lunch bag like it was a shield. When the hallway finally went silent again, she slowly stood up, her legs trembling. She was about to make a run for it when footsteps echoed across the marble floor. She froze. Dexter Lancaster in his perfectly tailored suit, walking with purpose. He glanced at her briefly, phone in hand, and said in a firm tone, "Good morning." "Good morning," she stammered, swallowing hard. He walked straight in and entered the meeting room. now carrying papers ready to be signed. Riley saw him through the glass. Dexter sat at the head of the table with George by his side, gesturing animatedly while presenting documents. 15. Accountants formed a semicircle around the table, all forcing polite smiles hidden behind their professionalism. Riley froze. The world seemed to slow down. Are you really going to let him sign that knowing what you know? She glanced at the clock. Exactly noon. The exact time for the delivery, the exact time to change someone's destiny or not. As much as she thought Dexter was arrogant and bossy, and as much as she often wanted to throw juice in his face whenever she read his ridiculous list of demands, she wasn't the kind of person to stay quiet in the face of injustice, especially one this big. But 5. What if he fires me? Technically, I work for him since the restaurant I work at is inside his company. What if they call security? What if I get arrested? Or, worse, what if he doesn't believe me? No, that's crazy. Riley took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds and told herself, too bad for him. There will be seasoning. There will be sauce. And there will be truth. With her head held high and the lunch bag in hand, she turned around, straightened her wrinkled uniform, and put on a smile. Courage, Riley. It's now or never. The worst that can happen is they throw me out the window. Well, considering we're on the 47th floor, maybe that's not the worst scenario. She murmured to herself. She knocked softly on the glass door, producing a faint sound that barely carried. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. George frowned with obvious irritation. Dexter simply waved his hand, signaling for her to come in. Riley pushed the door open and stepped inside. Mr. Dexter, she exclaimed with a radiant smile that could light up half of Los Angeles. I brought your lunch. It's warm and delicious, just the way you like it. Dexter looked at her with an expression, mixing confusion and impatience. Just leave it on the side table, he said, pointing without looking up from the papers in front of him. But Riley wasn't the type to follow simple instructions when a bigger mission was at stake. Oh, but Mr. Dexter, the chef made sure to use special spices today, she continued, slowly walking toward the main table while holding the bag as if it were a treasure. There's freshly ground black pepper, which according to my grandma Martha, is the secret to keeping away negative energy and scammers. George raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Can she just leave the food and go? We're in the middle of an important meeting, he said, his tone cutting through the air. Of course, Riley replied, cheerfully. But just look at this rice made with imported saffron from the place that makes the best saffron in the world. And there's a secret ingredient only I know about. Dexter sighed deeply. And what would that secret ingredient be? One of the accountants asked, genuinely curious. True love, Riley said with a wink. And a little bit of hope that people can still be honest with each other. The room fell silent for a moment. George drummed his fingers on the table with growing impatience. Riley, right? Dexter said, reading her name from her batch. Just leave the lunch on the side table so we can continue our meeting. But wait, Riley exclaimed, deliberately stepping closer to the main table. Mr. Dexter, you have to smell this amazing aroma before it gets cold. She held the thermal bag right under Dexter's nose as he leaned over the contracts. The aroma really was delicious. But Riley had other plans. Just smell how wonderful this is, she said, pretending to trip over her own foot. What happened next unfolded like a scene in slow motion. The thermal bag flew open in midair, releasing a cascade of seasoned rice, sautéed vegetables, and grilled chicken, which majestically scattered across the contracts. Dexter's perfectly tailored suit and part of the meeting table. The cup of orange juice Riley had been holding in her other hand met its fate on Dexter's Italian tie, creating an abstract masterpiece in shades of orange. Oh no, Riley cried, bringing her hands to her face in a performance worthy of an Oscar. I'm so clumsy, Mr. Dexter, please forgive me. I tripped over my own foot. My mom always told me to take dance lessons, but I thought it was silly. And now look at this. Dexter was sitting in his chair completely still with rice stuck to his lapel, sauce dripping down his tie and orange juice running from his perfectly combed hair. His expression was a mix of shock, disbelief, and a quickly growing anger. George exploded. "You did this on purpose," he shouted, jumping out of his chair. "How dare you interrupt such an important meeting with this nonsense?" Riley looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Nonsense, Mr. George, you're being very cruel to me." "It was an accident," she protested. "Although I have to admit, Mr. Dexter looks pretty stylish with that ginger sauce. Stains on clothes are the new trend, you know. I read about it in a lifestyle magazine last week. Executives who aren't afraid to get messy on the way to success." One of the younger accountants let out a muffled laugh, but quickly straightened up when George shot him a sharp glare. "This is unacceptable," George continued. Mr. Dexter, this woman should be fired immediately." Riley kept up her act, grabbing some napkins from the side table and stepping closer to Dexter. "Let me help clean this up." "Mr. Dexter, I promise I'll make it spotless," she said, trying to wipe the sauce off his tie, but only managing to spread it further. Dexter finally reacted, standing up abruptly. "Enough," he said, his voice echoing across the room. "Enough of this disaster. Everyone out. The meeting is postponed until tomorrow morning." George tried to protest. "But Dexter, we can still continue." "It's just a small," I said, "it's postponed." Dexter yelled with rice still stuck to his forehead. "Everyone get out of my way before I completely lose my composure." The 15 accountants left the room like soldiers in retreat, whispering among themselves. George passed Riley with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. Low enough for only her to hear. Riley just smiled and waved cheerfully. "Have a wonderful rest of the day, Mr. George." When everyone was gone, Dexter walked toward the door, still dripping ginger sauce. Riley followed him through the Empire Tower corridors. "Mr. Dexter, please wait," she called, running after him. Dexter stopped abruptly and turned to face her, his expression showing pure exhaustion. "What else do you want now?" he asked, his voice tired. "You've ruined my meeting, ruined my clothes, and ruined my lunch. What else could possibly go wrong today?" Riley stopped at a safe distance. "Mr. Dexter, I know I probably look completely out of my mind, and I admit my coordination skills aren't the best. But I need to talk to you about something very important, Riley. If this is about some personal problem or a complaint about the restaurant, it's not about the restaurant," she interrupted. "It's about you, about your company, about people who aren't who they seem to be." Dexter looked at her more closely now, noticing something different in her voice. The playfulness was gone, replaced by genuine urgency. "I promise I won't get too close to you to avoid any more incidents," Riley said, raising her hands as if surrendering. "But please, just give me 2 minutes in your private office. It's about something I overheard. Something you need to know before you sign any documents tomorrow." Dexter stayed silent for a long moment, studying Riley's face. There was something in her eyes that made him hesitate. Finally, he sighed deeply. 2 minutes, he said, pointing toward his office. "And don't even think about getting near my desk." Riley smiled with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Dexter. You won't regret it." "I already regret it," he muttered, still picking grains of rice off his jacket sleeve as they walked down the hall. Riley entered the office, keeping the promised distance, standing close to the door while Dexter headed to his private bathroom to try to clean up. 2 minutes start now, he said, disappearing behind the bathroom door. Riley looked around the office, impressed by the luxury, but nervous about the weight of what she was about to reveal. How do you start a conversation about corporate fraud with someone who was just attacked by a lunch? "Mr. Dexter," she called out toward the bathroom. "Do you remember?" I said, "I overheard something important." "Just say it," came his muffled reply, accompanied by the sound of vigorous paper towel use. Riley took a deep breath. "Well, I kind of got lost in the hallway this morning and overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to. A conversation about you." about a contract, and about how you're going to lose a lot of money if you sign that document. Continue, said Dexter. Now, paying closer attention. Mr. George was in a room with 15 men in suits, all like they had just swallowed sour lemons. And he said, Riley stopped and cleared her throat, preparing for her performance. He said this, you all understand perfectly, right? You must do the calculations completely wrong. She started imitating George's voice, making it deeper and more dramatic. Tell Dexter he's going to make 10 times more. With this merger with Meridian Corporation, get him to sign that contract right away. In reality, he's going to lose everything. 10 times more than he invests. Dexter came out of the bathroom wearing a clean shirt, but still looking skeptical. And then the accountants, Riley continued, now mimicking different voices. They were like, yes, Mr. George, we'll trick the boss. No problem. But with the tone of someone being forced to eat cold broccoli. Riley, Dexter interrupted, sitting down in his executive chair. Are you telling me you overheard my partner and 15 accountants plotting to deceive me? Exactly, she replied, thrilled that he finally understood. And it wasn't the kind of talk where they said, maybe this could go wrong. It was more like, we're going to destroy Dexter and then celebrate with champagne. Well, okay. They didn't actually say champagne, but that was the vibe. Dexter studied her for a long moment. Riley, do you realize how absurd this sounds? George has been my partner for 5 years. The accountants have worked for me for decades, and you are, well, a delivery girl who just ruined an important meeting with a flying lunch. Riley felt a pang in her chest. It was exactly what she had imagined he would say. I know how it sounds, she said with a sincerity that cut through her usual humor. Believe me, I can't believe I'm even standing here saying this, but Mr. Dexter, I swear on the memory of my great-grandma, Dolores, who made the best chocolate cake in Texas, that I heard every word of that conversation. Your great-grandma was from Texas. Actually, she was from Ohio, but she moved to Texas after meeting my great-grandpa who raised cattle. And Riley stopped, realizing she was drifting off topic. The point is, I'm not lying. Dexter leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the desk. Let's say, just for a moment, that you're telling the truth. Why would they do this? That's an excellent question, Riley said quickly. I was wondering the same thing. Maybe they want your company, or maybe Mr. Waffen, George has a gambling debt and needs your money to pay off a loan shark. Or maybe he's secretly always been jealous of your success and decided it was finally time for revenge. Or maybe, Dexter said slowly, a delivery girl is trying to get attention by making up an elaborate and ridiculous story. Riley felt like she had just been punched in the stomach. Mr. Dexter, I understand your distrust. I really do. If I were you, I'd probably think I was crazy too. But she paused, searching for the right words. But what if I'm right? What if tomorrow you sign that contract and lose everything? Something in Riley's voice made Dexter hesitate. There was a genuine urgency there, a desperation that didn't sound fake. All right, he finally said. I'll give you a chance. If you really heard this conversation, there must be proof. Documents, emails, some kind of solid evidence of this supposed plan. Riley lit up instantly. You want me to be a private detective? I want you to prove what you're saying. You have until tomorrow morning. If you bring me real evidence, I'll reconsider signing the contract. If you bring me nothing, I'll be banned from the Empire Tower. Forever. Something like that, Dexter confirmed. Riley extended her hand toward him. Deal, she said. Get ready, Mr. Dexter, because when I take on mission, I'm like a bulldog chasing bacon, relentless with an excellent sense of smell. Dexter shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. And Riley, he said as she headed for the door. Yes, try not to destroy anything else in the process. Riley laughed out loud. I promise I'll try to keep the damage to a minimum. She left the office with a confident smile, but as soon as the door closed, her expression shifted to pure determination. She had a mission, and she wasn't going to fail. In the hallway, Riley was walking quickly toward the elevators when a Familiar voice made her stop. Riley. She turned and saw George Hartwell approaching, wearing a smile that never reached his eyes. He was impeccable again, as if the chaos from the earlier meeting had never happened. "Mr. George," she said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "How are you? Were you able to get all that ginger sauce out of your clothes too?" "Perfectly clean." "Thank you," he replied, stopping uncomfortably close to her. "Tell me, did you enjoy the meeting today?" The question sounded innocent, but there was something in the way he asked it that made Riley alert. "Well, fun isn't exactly the word I'd use," she replied with a forced laugh. "I'd say it was more of a learning experience about the dangers of carrying food on unstable trays." George chuckled, but the sound was empty. "You know, Riley, accidents can be very dangerous, especially when they happen in the wrong places at the wrong times." "True," she agreed, keeping her tone light. "That's why I always wear non-slip shoes. Safety first, as they used to say in delivery school." "There's a delivery school?" "Not really. I just made that up," she said with a wink. "But there should be." George studied her for another moment, his smile growing colder. "Well, I hope you're careful with accidents and don't get hurt," he said. "Some things are better kept between us, don't you think?" Riley felt a shiver run through her, but kept her cheerful facade. "Of course, I'll be very careful." "Well, I should go. I have other deliveries to make." "Of course you do," George said, stepping back. "Have a good rest of your day, Riley. And remember, be careful with accidents." Riley waved cheerfully and walked toward the elevator. But her heart was racing. When the elevator doors closed, she finally allowed her mask to drop. "He knows," she thought. "He definitely knows." "I heard something." As the elevator descended, Riley couldn't see George in the hallway, pulling out his phone and dialing a number. "Hello," he said in a low, controlled voice. "We have a problem with the restaurant delivery girl." 2 hours later, Riley was no longer just a delivery girl, but an amateur detective determined to save a stubborn CEO from his own naivety. She had traded the restaurant uniform for casual clothes and a beret she thought made her look more investigative, but in it made her look like a lost French artist in Los Angeles. "All right, Riley," she murmured to herself as she watched the busy lobby. "You need proof. Documents, emails, 21. Recorded conversations, something that proves you're not just some clumsy girl with a tendency to spill food on millionaires." She noticed that the 23rd floor housed the accountant's offices. Perfect. If there was any proof of the scam, that's where she'd find it. In the elevator, Riley pressed the button for the 23rd floor and mentally reviewed her action plan. But when the doors opened, her stomach dropped. 3 of the 15 accountants from the morning meeting were standing right in front of the elevator as if they were waiting for her. "Hi," she said, trying to sound casual. "You have beautiful elevators." "Here." The man looked at her with obvious suspicion. Riley stepped out as if nothing was wrong and turned left down the hallway, but she could hear footsteps following her. Great, she thought. A corporate chase. Definitely. Not in the delivery girl manual. I never read. Riley quickened her pace, passing rooms with important names on the doors. Tax Analysis Department, Internal Audit Section, Executive Meeting Room. When she glanced over her shoulder, there were now 5 men following her, including 2 she recognized from the morning meeting. "Excuse me," she called to a secretary rushing by with a stack of documents. "Where's the ladies' room?" "End of the hall on the right," the woman replied, too busy to notice the little espionage comedy unfolding. Riley ran down the hall and slipped into the women's restroom, locking the door behind her. At least there she had a few minutes to think about her next move. But as she washed her hands, she heard male voices outside. She went into the ladies' room. "We can't go in there." "Then we wait until she comes out." Riley looked around desperately. There was a small window, but they were on the 23rd floor. Unless she had suddenly developed superhero skills, that wasn't an option. That's when she noticed a cleaning cart abandoned in the corner, complete with a uniform hanging on a hook. A light bulb went off in her head. 5 minutes later, Riley walked out of the bathroom wearing the blue cleaning uniform, a cap pulled low over her eyes and pushing the cart. The accountants glanced at her but didn't recognize her. "Excuse me," she said, lowering her voice and putting on a vaguely Midwestern accent. "I need to clean this area. Leak on the floor. Above." The men stepped aside, allowing her to pass with the cart. Riley could hardly believe it had worked. She pushed the cart down the hallway, pretending to wipe down a few surfaces while keeping an eye on the office doors. She needed to find George's office, or at least a place where she could overhear something important. That's when she heard a familiar voice coming from a room with the door slightly open. "That's right," George was saying on the phone. "She's trying to gather information. But don't worry, I've got everything under control." Riley stopped the cart right next to the door, pretending to clean the floor, while listening carefully. "Dexter will never suspect me," George continued with a confidence that made Riley feel sick. "We've been friends since we were 8 years old. We grew up on the same street, went to the same school, the same college. He trusts me more than anyone else in the world." Riley felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Childhood friends, that changed everything. This wasn't just corporate betrayal. It was the destruction of a decade-long friendship. "That clueless delivery girl has no idea what she's up against," George said with disdain. "But we can't underestimate her. She managed to convince Dexter to listen to her crazy theories. I'm going to plant some evidence to make her look like a blackmailer. Fake documents showing she tried to extort other businessmen." Riley gripped the broom handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. He was planning to frame her. "Prepare the documents we discussed," George went on. "A fake criminal record, evidence of past. Watch her get arrested for extortion." The call ended and Riley heard George's chair creak as he got up. She quickly started scrubbing the floor harder, keeping her head down. The door swung open and George stepped out, almost bumping into the cleaning cart. "Careful with that floor," Riley said, disguising her voice and keeping her eyes down. "Sorry," George mumbled distractedly, walking past her down the hallway. As soon as he disappeared, Riley dropped the broom and ran to the nearest elevator. Her heart was pounding. She now had crucial information. George and Dexter were childhood friends, and George was planning to frame her with fake evidence. But when the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, Riley came face to face with a problem. George was standing there along with 6 accountants, all staring directly at her. "Hello, Riley," George said with a cold smile. "Or should I say, janitor." "Riley?" Riley glanced down and realized she was still wearing the cleaning uniform. Her cover was blown. "Oh," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "It's just that I have multiple jobs. The economy is tough. You know how it is." "Of course you do," George replied. "And I'm sure one of your specialties is gathering information." Riley felt sweat trickling down her back, but kept her smile. "Information? Mr. George. The only things I collect are recyclable bottles and discount coupons and dust, of course. There's a lot of dust in this building." "Interesting," George said, taking a step toward her. "Because I've been told a certain delivery girl has been asking questions about confidential company documents." "You must have me confused with someone else," Riley replied, slowly backing away. "We delivery girls all look the same in uniform. It's like a fascinating sociological phenomenon." George didn't look convinced, but before he could respond, the elevator doors closed between them. Riley had managed to escape, but she knew her freedom to investigate was over. As the elevator descended to the lobby, she realized she urgently needed a new plan. George was one step ahead, and now he knew she was digging. Even worse, he was setting up a 27:47 trap that could destroy not only her chances of saving Dexter, but also her own life. When the doors opened, Riley quickly stepped out, tore off the cleaning uniform, and tossed it into a trash bin. She needed to think, and she needed to think fast. The 30-year friendship between George and Dexter was her biggest disadvantage. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to turn it into her greatest weapon. Dexter Lancaster sat alone in his luxurious office, watching the orange sunset spread over Los Angeles through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Something was troubling his mind, something he couldn't quite name. Riley Martinez, the chaotic delivery girl who had turned his meeting into a comedy scene and then appeared with an unbelievable story about corporate betrayal. Why couldn't he stop thinking about her? He leaned back in the leather executive chair, drumming his fingers on the mahogany desk. There was something in Riley's desperate sincerity that unsettled him. The way she looked at him when she spoke about the supposed scheme, the genuine urgency in her voice, as if she truly cared about what would happen to him. Ridiculous, he muttered to himself, a delivery girl who barely knows me, worried about my business. But then his thoughts drifted to George, his partner, his oldest friend. If Riley's accusations were true, Dexter closed his eyes and his mind involuntarily wandered back in time. He was 8 years old, running through George's backyard, wearing a Superman t-shirt and scraped knees. George was right behind him, laughing as they chased an imaginary dog that had stolen their makeshift superhero Kate's. When we grow up, we're going to be business partners, George had shouted that day, climbing up their favorite tree. We'll have the biggest company in the world and be best friends forever. Promise? Dexter had asked, holding out his pinky. Promise? George replied, sealing the pact with their intertwined fingers. The years rushed through Dexter's memory like a fast-forwarded movie. Elementary school, where George always shared his lunch when Dexter forgot his own. High school, where they were an inseparable duo on the debate team. Business school, where they worked on projects together and dreamed of the future that awaited them. And then came the first ventures. Sleepless nights planning strategies, the modest celebrations when they landed their first clients. George had always been there, always supporting him, always believing in their shared dream. 30 years of friendship. How could he doubt that? Because of a stranger's words. A firm knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in, Dexter said, straightening up in his chair. George walked in with a serious expression, carrying a brown folder that seemed to hold important documents. Dexter, we need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him. I heard the ridiculous accusations that delivery girl made today. Dexter sighed. George, I know it may sound absurd, but may sound. George interrupted, sitting down in the chair across from him. Dexter, are you really considering the words of a woman you just met over mine? Over 30 years of partnership and friendship. There was genuine pain in George's voice, and it hit Dexter right in the chest. I'm not accusing you of anything, Dexter said calmly. I just thought I should mention what she said. George opened the folder and spree a 31:18. Several documents across the desk. Well, since we're talking about it, I think you should see this. Dexter glanced down